Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We're continuing our reading of the pretty radical feminist book in order to argue with it, debunk it, and provide an alternative perspective to the statements she has put forth. Okay? Let us continue. Go ahead and listen to this as you're driving, you're on the bus, whatever fun thing it is that you are doing. Alright, she continues. The gender binary itself is being superseded as a form of social control. Now, here she contends that gender binary is a form of social control. And by her phrasing it that way, she's then putting it in a negative perspective here. She's trying to say that gender shouldn't be controlled and that it is something that it is up for controllability, which just isn't true. It's controlled by our biology, and someone's mental illness doesn't mean that we need to indulge them in a fantasy, regardless of what the magician-like plastic surgeons have done. And in Islam, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created man and woman, right? They cannot switch. And we know the hadiths that state that the Prophet, peace be upon him, cursed men who dress like women and women who dress like men. So it's quite clear that it is not something permissible in Islam, but rather something along the lines of chemicals in the food, a mental defect from pollutions in the environment, as well as when the woman was pregnant. Since the early 2010s, there has been a seismic cultural shift in the cultural visibility of trans and non-binary people. Okay, so cultural visibility, seismic cultural shift. So she's using very large words here, which are accurate, actually, of the visibility of their woke agenda, of their anti-religious agenda concerning how men and women should express themselves for their temporary existence on Earth. Because when she says visibility, she's admitting that the media has made them more visible, especially TikTok, because they'll ban you if you speak out against them, thus making them appear bigger than what they are, but at the same time saturating the social media sphere, which reaches across the globe, right? And their huge pushing of drag queen story hours in public schools, their pushing of books in kids' libraries, which I've seen, by the way, this has caused them to be more visible. Now, the non-binary nonsense, to me, gets at, they think of an image of a woman in 1920s English aristocracy clothing, right? And they're like, oh, she's like with a fan, and they're like, well, I don't fit into that because I like to go hunting, or I like playing basketball or soccer, right? So they feel like they have to identify with men in order to say that they're not a woman, which is absurd. There are many expressions of how to be a woman, from women living in the tundra, women living in the jungles of Vietnam, someone in the rural villages of Mexico, someone in the deep south, right, on a horse farm, a woman in downtown Manhattan. How the woman will express her feminine nature will shift depending on what kind of environment she's in. If she has to be more survivalist, that is necessary in order to protect her children, okay? And if one has excess comfort and she decides not to have children and to chase money, which sometimes can appear to be more masculine, because she's not marrying for money but deciding to go at it herself, that doesn't make her a man, but rather it just makes her a woman with a different expression of femininity, I'd argue. So the non-binary stuff is really convoluted and shows to me that we have too much idle time. Because if you have enough time to force people to address you in this non-binary way, it just shows decadence. It just shows that you have nothing better to really worry about and focus on. That you are so idle that your brain has begun to focus on really bizarre ways of self-expression. It almost appears that people don't know how to express their uniqueness, so they must invent an alter ego persona in order to escape the shackles of their own mind. A great many young people in particular are coming out en masse as transgender, genderqueer, or non-binary, and that's positive change. So here she lets you obviously know, we know her bias, right? But now it's quite clear. Positive. She thinks it's great that young people, so people under the age of 20, want to be trans and undergo life-altering medications and plastic surgery. Now, it's quite intense to call that positive when you have so many detransitioners who are getting silenced and whatnot, but we do have a battle ahead of us as Muslims if we are to save our children from this ideology. It is a great deal more normal to be openly trans than it even was a decade ago, but social conservatives are loudly resisting this change, as are many political interest groups afraid of the world beyond the gender binary. Okay, so the world beyond the gender binary. Okay. What's unique about this is we know from the past, as Muslims, if we reflect upon the Quran, it tells us to, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets us know, to travel throughout the earth and see what was of those who came before. Look at the ruins, the people of Thamud. We have so many examples of where Allah destroyed a civilization. Through earthquake, you name it, famine. Just think about how Pharaoh, suffered by not submitting to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how Moses and Harun and Aaron, right, were sent. How did Allah punish them and afflict them in order to get the leader to change and to stop their culture that they had, right? If Allah will do that for people who commit shirk, then we also must examine how Prophet Lut, peace be upon him, was sent with a clear message to his people in his little area, and we have to remember there is going to be a lot of traumatization from breaking the holy edicts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent down. And the Jews aren't really fighting it as much as the Christians and Muslims are. The Christians are losing, unfortunately, their battle. But for many, we can see how a woman growing a beard and then giving birth and then suckling that baby, they're inside of us, it doesn't look right. Okay? Or the other day, I saw an image of a man who became a eunuch, and he's in his 40s and he has lipstick on, looks terrible, and he's claiming he's a woman because he has paid someone to remove his functioning area. When you see that, you don't see that as something to boast and be proud of, but you look at the insanity of the medical industry, how they have abused their talents, because plastic surgery used to help soldiers refix their face during World War I and World War II. It was really for soldiers to repair themselves, try to operate in society, especially those who got so mutilated. And now, it's used to one would argue, extract money from the mentally ill. And I think on Judgment Day we will see countless people and their lab coats being tossed into the flames of hell for what they have done. And so when she says the world beyond the gender binary, it's the children who will grow up in the madhouse, who will lose the authentic, best, superior expression of a mother. Because if a woman really wanted to be a man, she would lose all feeling of wanting to have children. Okay? And if a man thought he was a woman, he wouldn't be asking for a lot of the rights and privileges that men have. It's really quite silly when you're allowed to analyze it, but they don't want to have open conversations. This is why they shut everything down as hate speech. It's a political tactic that is quite effective. It won't last forever because the generations of the children who are 10 years old right now, who are going to grow up in this madness, you will see that pendulum, I think, swing so far back that it won't be a very pretty picture. Because if people like me didn't have a great mother or father, and you have that gap in your heart, and you figure out what stole your mother and father from you, you want to destroy that. You want to help that pain not spread. So, for the children who are going to grow up under the Rainbow Mafia agenda and philosophy, they'll realize they never got to have a classical image of a mother, and revenge will breed. Because you can get envy when you see a more traditional mother embracing her beautiful femininity. She has this light, this nur on her face from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And another child was denied it, and then they see it, they recognize it, they float to it, they want it. It soothes them, it calms them, and then they see at the Frankenstein that they got. Hate, envy, resentment, confusion will arise. And that is when you'll see very extreme expressions. It's quite interesting. Really quite interesting. That's why some people who speak out about the nuances of what going beyond the gender binary means are heavily censored, because you also have to know they're making tons of money, huge amounts of money, and detransitioners point this out often, like, hey, we should have waited, or they argue they should have presented like Jeffree Star. They left their bits intact and just presented in some different way, that it was less invasive surgically. But the big pharma and those plastic surgeons, they're not your friend. They're willing to prey upon you. Oftentimes I think that our minds see a lab coat and we think friend, because of our classical images of a doctor saving a life. And we don't focus on things like the Nuremberg trials or the darkness of what some horror movies have portrayed, which are actually quite accurate if you think about what lies within the minds of some of those doctors, if only they had the opportunity and power to exercise the things that they really wanted to do without going to prison. And now you get to see them line their pockets by going after young people who are insecure, misguided, alone, and not really sure of who they are in this world. And going beyond that gender binary is a risk. And I think you're going to see a clash of civilizations. One thing that will be great about the third world going into the first world is the leftists think they will be able to indoctrinate that new group of people. But those rural farm people are innocent and they may be ignorant, but they still have a close fitra, they still have a close connection to their maker. And when you try to push that ideology on their kid, they're going to be like, whoa, we've gone into the spider's web here. We need to cut some webs here. We need to fix the situation. And then, since there's millions of them coming in, especially Catholic, Christian immigrants from South America, I mean, they are not Berkeley brats. They're not Ivy League, fart sniffing, pill popping, cocktail drinking, leather couch academics. They're not anarchists either who want to, rebel against religion and whatnot. So you'll see how the public school system is going to really suffer if they keep pushing this stuff. And more people will resort to homeschooling, and then when the liberals try to ban that, that's when you're going to see people getting very territorial over their children. So going beyond the gender binary will have, maybe could even cause an outbreak of a civil war. Because when a perversion of sexual decadence is pushed upon innocent, pure, naive, and trusting children, a God-fearing parent is going to go into survivor mode. And that's when you're going to get clashes. And are they going to build more prisons, start locking up parents who resist this group? Are they going to start firing parents who won't accept woke corporate HR philosophies? Will people secretly start only hiring within their groups in order to escape the economic tyranny that'll be placed upon them if they don't bend the knee to this agenda? There's a lot to be had there. And the chessboard is laid down. And so we'll see. But it's exploded because they've pushed it in schools and on TV, even on Blue's Clues, children's television. For kids, they have no concept of any of that stuff. They're pure, but sexual deviance, perversions, confusion, all that are being pumped into them. And then the kids who will be raised by them can have a hard time because it's so radical, so extreme, so unholy that you're going to have a problem. And even if you have woke priests and imams bending the knee to the agenda of Shaitan, you will always have the truth about what the Maker has blessed. And if the truth is there like a candle in the dark tunnel, people will seek it out. And people will endure and survive under mass amounts of oppression. And so I foresee, a very unstable future if they're allowed to just keep oppressing us with their ideology. It's just two things that can't mix, oil and water. It just isn't going to work. One has to rule over the other. They can't simultaneously coexist, I don't think, because they always go after the children. And the children belong to the parents, they don't belong to the community. They are members of the community, but the sole proprietorship, the sole guardianship belongs with the parents. And in order to push the woke agenda, they have to sever that tie between the parents. Just similar to how the communists did with their philosophy. So it's definitely not one to take lightly. It's encroaching. It's encroaching. And censorship can get high, but people will find ways to communicate, to gather, to petition, to protest, and people will become more and more desperate the more censored they become. That is going to be something really interesting. People will start to become political martyrs for fighting for their children to be free from the indoctrination of the Rainbow Mafia. So, this author, she was right when she says there is a huge cultural shift because of cultural visibility, and that going beyond the gender binary is going to have a huge unknown in the future, but she looks at it as positive, whereas I look at it as negative. The music industry has pushed this agenda the most of all, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, let me know what you think. Very interesting, very serious, thought-compelling discussion to be had here. So, something we must think about because it is approaching, and there is no escape because the internet is all over the earth.